Have you ever wondered what attitudes truly touch God's heart? Throughout the Bible, God doesn't just leave us commandments or teachings. He also shows us which attitudes He blesses abundantly. Because, let's be honest, we all seek those divine blessings that give us peace, joy, and meaning in life. But we often wonder how to better align ourselves with what God wants from us. This video isn't simply about listing attitudes and leaving it at that. It's about delving deeper into why those attitudes have such a profound impact on the relationship between us and God. Before beginning this beautiful reflection, I want to invite you to follow our channel, Walk with Christ, like it, and share it. This motivates us to continue creating these beautiful prayers. The wonderful thing is that these attitudes aren't just about obtaining blessings. They transform us from within, bringing us closer to God's purpose for our lives and, in addition, helping us live a full life. God, in His infinite wisdom, not only looks at what we do, but also at the heart with which we do it. Sometimes we believe that blessings are far away, or that they are a prize only a few can achieve. But the reality is that God is closer than we imagine, and His desire is to bless us at every step. Of course, there is a key ingredient: our attitude. It's not about doing things to earn favors, but rather how we face life, how we treat others, and how we respond to challenges. In this video, we will explore in depth those 7 attitudes that God not only observes, but also chooses to bless abundantly. Each one has a transforming power, and if we make them part of our daily lives, we will see how God covers us with His grace and love in ways we never imagined. So, if you've been feeling stuck, lost, or simply want to strengthen your relationship with God, stay, because these attitudes could be the change you've been looking for. Let's start with the first attitude that God blesses abundantly, and that is humility. Humility is like that key that opens doors that seemed impossible to cross. Now, when we talk about humility, we're not talking about false modesty or putting ourselves down. We're talking about the ability to recognize that, no matter how much we achieve, it all comes from God. And that keeps us grounded and our hearts in heaven. In James 4 verse 6, the Bible says something very powerful: God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. How powerful, isn't it? Humility is something that God appreciates so much that He is willing to give more grace, more favor, more blessings to those who practice it. But it's also one of those attitudes that is difficult to cultivate, especially in a world where we are taught to compete, to excel, to prove our worth. So, what does it really mean to be humble before God? Well, first of all, it's about recognizing that we don't know everything, that we need His guidance every day. Pride tells us, "I can do it alone," while humility whispers, "God, I need you." This recognition is what opens the way for God to act freely in our lives. When we stop relying solely on our own strength and begin to trust in His power, that's when blessings begin to flow. Humility is also reflected in the way we treat others. Jesus Himself, being the Son of God, humbled Himself to serve. In Philippians 2 verses 3-4, we are told, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility consider others more important than yourselves." Imagine how impactful this is. It invites us to treat others with such profound respect that we don't put ourselves above them, but learn to value and serve those around us. And you may wonder, how does God bless the humble? Well, first, He gives them peace. A humble person doesn't live worried about their position, their image, or their success, because they trust that God is in control. God also blesses humility by giving us wisdom. Proverbs 11 verse 2 says, "With pride comes dishonor, but with humility comes wisdom." Humility opens our eyes to see things as they truly are, to learn from others, and to hear God's voice clearly. Furthermore, humility connects us directly with people. When we are humble, others are drawn to us because we are not in constant competition, but rather give them space to be who they are. God blesses this attitude with healthy and authentic relationships, as humility creates an environment of trust and respect. It's important to note that being humble doesn't mean being weak or allowing others to walk all over you. On the contrary, humility is an inner strength that allows you to remain calm and peaceful, even in situations where others might lose control. Humility teaches you to recognize your limitations without feeling inferior, because you know that God is the one who supplies everything that is lacking. And what happens when we lack humility? Well, when we let pride take control, we begin to distance ourselves from God without even realizing it. Pride blinds us, makes us think we are not. We need no one else, not even God. And that's when things start to get complicated. That's why God resists the proud. Not because He doesn't love them, but because pride prevents His grace from flowing into our lives. Finally, a humble attitude allows us to be molded by God. If we recognize that we still have much to learn, God can work in us, transform us, and prepare us for greater things. When we show ourselves humble before Him, what we are saying is, "God, here I am, ready for you to do your will in me." And believe me, when you take that stance, blessings come in ways you can't imagine. Let's move on to the second attitude that God blesses abundantly, and that is generosity. Have you ever felt that when you give, you somehow receive much more than you gave? It's like a universal principle, but in the Bible this principle is very clear. God loves a cheerful giver. The fascinating thing about generosity is that it's not just about giving money, but about having an attitude of giving in everything you do, whether with your time, your talents, your love, or your resources. In 2 Corinthians 9 verse 7, Paul tells us, "Each one should give as he or she has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver." Here's the key, you see? It's not a matter of giving for the sake of giving or giving, but rather doing it from the heart, with joy and willingness. Generosity is one of those attitudes that God not only notices, but also multiplies. And I'll tell you something, when we talk about generosity, we're not talking about quantity, but quality. Jesus Himself gave us a great example in the story of the widow who offered 2 small coins. In the eyes of others, it wasn't much, but Jesus saw the heart with which she gave, and that transformed it into something much more valuable than the large offerings of the rich. It's a powerful reminder that generosity is not measured by the size of what you give, but by the intention with which you do it. Now you might wonder, how does God bless generosity? First, generosity changes you. When you get used to giving, whether it's time, attention, or resources, your heart softens and you learn to see the needs of others with more compassion. You become more sensitive to opportunities to help, and that, in turn, creates a cycle of blessing. God sees that generous heart, and as He says in Luke 6 verse 38, "Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be put into your lap." It's incredible. God promises that the more you give, the more you receive. And not just in material terms, but also in satisfaction, joy, and peace. Generosity also creates human connections. When you give without expecting anything in return, others notice. It may be a small gesture, like helping a friend, or simply listening to someone who needs to vent. But those acts of generosity build deep and lasting relationships. And the most beautiful thing is that, even if you don't do it with the intention of receiving, you end up being blessed by the people you've given to. God also blesses generosity by multiplying what you have. Perhaps you've experienced it after giving something, and suddenly see how your resources stretch further than you thought. It's as if, the moment you decide to trust God and be generous, He makes sure that what you have goes further. This isn't an exchange with God, as if by giving something He owes you more, but rather His way of showing you that you can trust Him completely, even when you think you don't have much to offer. Another beautiful aspect of generosity is that it reminds us that everything we have comes from God. When we are generous, we are actually acknowledging that we are not the absolute owners of what we possess. God gives us so that we can also share with others. It's a kind of chain of blessings. God blesses you, you bless others, and then those people can bless more. It's like a river that flows constantly, without stopping. And of course, generosity makes us happier. It's proven that generous people tend to be happier and more satisfied with their lives. It's like a positive side effect. When you help someone, whether with a small gesture or something bigger, you feel like you're making a difference. That feeling of satisfaction, that smile from someone you've helped, is a blessing in itself. Now let's move on to the third attitude that God blesses abundantly, and that is patience. Patience is a virtue that we often feel is slipping through our fingers, right? In a world where everything is immediate, where we want everything now, having patience can seem like an impossible mission. However, God teaches us that patience is not only an attitude we should cultivate, but one of the ones He blesses the most. And the reason is simple. Patience allows us to trust in His timing and His plan. Imagine this. Sometimes we are so desperate to see a result, we are so overwhelmed by the desire to achieve our goals or solve a problem that we forget something fundamental. God has a perfect time for everything. In Ecclesiastes 3 verse 11 it says, He has made everything beautiful in its time. This is a profound truth. If we learn to be patient and, by waiting on God, we discover that when He acts, He does so perfectly, better than we could have planned. Patience leads us to something very important. Trust in God. When we wait on God patiently, we are saying, God, I know You are in control, even if I don't understand it now or see a way out. I trust that, in Your time, everything will work out. This is because, often, in our impatience, we make hasty decisions that can lead us down difficult paths. Patience, on the other hand, protects us from falling into anxiety and fear and allows us to rest in God's plan. And here's an interesting truth. Patience doesn't mean passivity. Sometimes we confuse waiting patiently with doing nothing. But the reality is that biblical patience is active. It means continuing to do the right thing, continuing to strive, continuing to trust, even if we don't see the results immediately. God blesses that attitude of persistence. In James 5 verses 7 to 8, we are encouraged to be patient like the farmer who waits for the precious harvest of the field. That is, even if you don't see the fruits today, keep caring, keep working, because the harvest will come. God also blesses patience because it helps us grow spiritually. Through waiting, God shapes our character, teaching us lessons we wouldn't learn otherwise. Think of biblical figures like Abraham, who waited years to see the promise of a son fulfilled, or Joseph, who was sold into slavery and spent years in prison before becoming governor of Egypt. They had to learn patience, and although they surely felt frustrated at some point, God rewarded that patience in an incredible way. Furthermore, patience also teaches us to treat others better. Often, in our relationships, whether with friends, family, or even co-workers, a lack of patience can lead to conflict. How many times have we said something we regretted just because we didn't have the patience to listen first? God blesses those who are patient with others, because by being patient, we are showing the love and grace we have received from Him. Proverbs 14 verse 29 says, "He who is patient shows great discernment, but he who is hasty shows foolishness." Patience helps us to be more understanding, to not judge so quickly, and to have better relationships. And the most beautiful thing is that patience is a reflection of God. Think about it. God is incredibly patient with us. How many times have we failed, stumbled, made wrong decisions, and yet God is still by our side, waiting for us with love and mercy? He is patient because He knows we are in a process of growth, and He gives us opportunities to improve, learn, and move forward. Another way God blesses patience is by giving us peace. When you are patient, you are no longer worried about what hasn't happened yet or what you haven't accomplished. You know God is working, and that gives you a deep peace of mind. While impatience generates stress, anxiety, and frustration, patience brings with it a sense of calm, a sense that everything will be okay because you trust that God has a plan, and that plan is perfect. But of course, being patient isn't easy, especially when we're in the midst of a challenging situation. We've all been there, waiting for an answer, for an opportunity, for a change. And it's in those moments that we most need to remember that God blesses patience, because He knows that there are valuable lessons in waiting. It teaches us to depend on Him, to be stronger, and to see things from a broader perspective. The fourth attitude that God blesses abundantly is gratitude. Gratitude is one of those attitudes that, when we practice it, completely changes our perspective on life. And the most incredible thing is that when we are grateful, we open the door to more blessings. It's as if a grateful heart creates space for God to fill it even more. Think about it for a moment. How often do we take the good things we have for granted? Many times we focus so much on what's missing, or on what hasn't turned out the way we wanted, that we forget all that we already have. And the truth is, when we begin to be aware of all the good that God has placed in our lives, from the small things to the largest, something inside us changes. We realize that even if we don't have everything we want, we have much more than we need. 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 18 says, "Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus." Here's the secret. Gratitude isn't just for when things are going well, but also for difficult times. And I know it sounds complicated, but it's precisely in those moments when gratitude has the most power. Being thankful, even in the midst of challenges, is a sign of confidence. Gratitude in God, in knowing that He is doing something good, even if we don't see it clearly now. And I assure you that when we cultivate this attitude, God blesses us in many ways. First, it gives us peace. Gratitude frees us from the anxiety of wanting more and more. It helps us live fully in the present because we recognize what we already have. When you are grateful, you stop focusing on what you lack and begin to see the blessings that are already before you. And that, in turn, generates more joy in your life. Gratitude also transforms our relationships. Who doesn't like to feel valued? When you are grateful for the people around you, whether for small gestures or for their presence in your life, you create an environment of love and respect. And this, too, is blessed by God. Colossians 3 verse 15 says, "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, because as members of one body you were called to peace. And be thankful." Do you see how gratitude is connected to peace? When you are thankful, you not only find peace for yourself, but you help create peace around you. God also blesses gratitude by multiplying what you already have. It's a very interesting spiritual principle. When you are grateful for little, God entrusts you with more. We see this in the parable of the talents, where those who were faithful with little received much more. When we are grateful for what we have, whether material things, our relationships, or our health, we are saying, "God, I trust that everything I have is enough, and I know you can bless and multiply it." Gratitude also makes us more resilient. Life isn't always easy, and we all go through difficult times. But when we have an attitude of gratitude, even in the midst of trials, we find strength to keep going. It's as if gratitude gives us a new perspective, reminding us that, despite the difficulties, God remains faithful, and there is something to be thankful for every day. Instead of sinking into complaining, gratitude lifts us up and helps us see opportunities in the midst of challenges. And we cannot forget that gratitude is also a form of worship to God. When we thank Him, not only for what He has given us, but for who He is, we are honoring His goodness and love. It's recognizing that everything good we have comes from Him. Psalm 100 verse 4 says, "Enter His gates with thanksgiving, and His courts with thanksgiving. Give thanks to Him and bless His name." This is how we approach God, with a grateful heart. And when we do, we experience His presence in a deeper way. Gratitude also protects us from pride. Sometimes, when we achieve certain accomplishments or goals, we can be tempted to think it's all thanks to our own efforts. But gratitude reminds us that everything we have has come from God. It keeps us humble and aware of our dependence on Him. And this humility, combined with gratitude, is an attitude that God blesses abundantly. Another beautiful aspect of gratitude is that it's contagious. When we are grateful, we inspire others to do the same. Think about how the atmosphere changes when someone, in a conversation, starts talking about all the good things in their life instead of complaining about what's missing. Gratitude creates a positive environment, full of hope, and that affects not only those who practice it, but also those around them. Let's move on to the fifth attitude that God blesses abundantly, and that is obedience. This is one of those attitudes that may not always be easy, but it certainly has a profound impact on our relationship with God. Obedience isn't simply following rules or commandments because we have to. In reality, it's a response of love and trust toward God, saying, "I trust that your ways are better than mine." The Bible is full of examples where obedience brings great blessings. Think of Abraham. God asked him to do something that seemed unthinkable, leave his land and his family to go to a place he didn't even know. And what did Abraham do? He obeyed without question, because he trusted that God had a plan. And look how He blessed him. God made Abraham a great nation, gave him countless descendants, and showered him with favor. Now, I want us to think about obedience as more than simply following instructions. True obedience comes from a heart that desires to honor God, not out of obligation, but because it trusts in His wisdom. Deuteronomy 28 verses 1-2 says, "If you faithfully obey the Lord your God and carefully keep all His commandments I command you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. All these blessings will come upon you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God." It's an incredible promise, isn't it? God doesn't just ask for obedience for the sake of asking for it, but because He knows that when we follow His way, blessings come naturally and abundantly. And obedience protects us. Sometimes, when we don't understand why God is asking us to do or not do something, we get frustrated. Because from our perspective, we don't always it makes sense. But God sees beyond what we can see. His wisdom is infinite. And when He asks us to obey, it's because He knows what's best for us, even when we don't understand it at the moment. Obedience keeps us in His plan, and that's the safest place we can be. One of the great blessings of obedience is that it gives us freedom. It may sound contradictory, but when we obey God, instead of feeling limited, we experience an inner freedom. Why? Because we stop struggling with our own ideas or paths, which often lead us to chaos, and surrender to God's perfect will. We no longer have to bear the burden of making every decision on our own, because we trust that God guides us and leads us on the best path. Jesus Himself said in John 14 verse 15, "If you love me, keep my commandments." Obedience is a response of love. And when we obey God, we are saying, "I love you enough to trust that what you ask of me is best for me." And of course, obedience brings inner peace. When we know we are walking in God's plan, that we are doing what He asks of us, there is a peace that nothing and no one can take away from us. No matter how many difficulties or challenges we face, we know we are under His protection, and that peace is one of the greatest blessings we can experience. Instead of living in uncertainty or fear, we can walk confidently, knowing we are obeying the God who is in control of all. But let's not forget that obedience also requires sacrifice. Sometimes, it won't always be easy. And there are times when what God asks of us may go against what we want, or what we think is best. But that's where our faith comes into play. It's saying to God, "Even if I don't understand, even if I don't like it, I obey you, because I trust in you." A powerful example of this is Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He knew what awaited Him on the cross, and even though in His humanity He felt the weight of suffering, He prayed to the Father, saying, "Not my will, but yours be done." That total obedience led to the greatest blessing of all, our salvation. Furthermore, obedience connects us more deeply with God. Every time we obey, we are strengthening our relationship with Him. We are building mutual trust. God knows He can count on us, and we know we can fully trust Him. And that creates a cycle of blessing, in which the more we obey, the closer we are to Him, and the more we understand His will for our lives. It's also important to remember that obedience to God won't always be understood by others. You may make decisions based on what God has spoken or guided you, and others may not understand or even question it. But, at the end of the day, blessing comes when we obey God, not people's expectations or opinions. And when we walk in that obedience, God will show others, sooner or later, that His way is always the best. Let's move on to the sixth attitude that God blesses abundantly, and that is forgiveness. If there's anything that has the power to free our lives from unnecessary burdens, it's forgiveness. Forgiveness is that attitude that, although not always easy to apply, profoundly transforms us and opens us to receive the blessings God has for us. Forgiveness as an attitude is one of the most important pillars of the Christian faith. If you think about it, Jesus came precisely to give us the greatest example of forgiveness. When He was on the cross, in the midst of unimaginable pain, He prayed for those who were crucifying Him, saying, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Luke 23 verse 34. That's impressive. If Jesus, in the moment of greatest suffering, was able to forgive those who hurt Him, it shows us that forgiveness is not only necessary, but also a direct door to peace and freedom. Now, I know that forgiving isn't always easy. Sometimes the wounds others inflict on us are deep, and we feel that by forgiving we are letting them get away with it. But the reality is that forgiveness isn't so much for the other person, but for us. Resentment and bitterness are burdens that weigh us down, rob us of peace, and distance us from God's blessings. When we decide to forgive, we are not justifying the wrong done to us, but rather freeing our hearts from the emotional prison in which that pain has placed us. The Bible calls us to forgive consistently. In Matthew 18 verses 21 to 22, Peter asks Jesus, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother who sins against me? Up to 7 times. And Jesus answers, "I say to you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Can you imagine? 77 times. Jesus is telling us that forgiveness has no limits, that it is not an option, but a constant attitude we must cultivate. And here's the interesting part. God blesses those who forgive. When you decide to let go of bitterness and resentment, you are making space in your life for God to act. Forgiveness is like removing an obstacle that is blocking the blessings God wants to pour out on you. It frees you from emotional weight. It gives peace of mind and allows you to move forward without being tied to the past. Furthermore, forgiveness makes us more like Jesus. If we are called to follow His example, forgiveness is an essential part of that calling. Every time we forgive, we are reflecting the love and mercy we have received from Him. Because, let's be honest, we've all failed. We all need to be forgiven for something. And if God, in His immense mercy, has forgiven us, how can we not forgive others? Another incredible aspect of forgiveness is that it heals us. Studies show that people who live with resentment or bitterness are more likely to suffer from health problems like stress or anxiety. Forgiveness, on the other hand, has a healing power. It frees us from the poison we hold in our hearts. It's as if, by forgiving, we're allowing an open wound to finally heal. But be careful. Forgiving doesn't mean you have to continue allowing someone to hurt you, or that you should forget what happened. No. Forgiveness is about letting go of resentment, but also about learning from the experience. Sometimes, forgiveness goes hand in hand with setting healthy boundaries. You can forgive someone and still decide it's better to keep your distance to protect your peace. Forgiveness isn't synonymous with vulnerability. Rather, it's a sign of your strength. God also blesses forgiveness because it unites us with others. Human relationships aren't perfect, and throughout our lives we will experience conflicts and misunderstandings. But when forgiveness is part of our daily lives, our relationships are healthier and more lasting. Instead of accumulating resentments, forgiveness allows us to heal wounds and continue building relationships based on love and respect. And this is something God blesses profoundly, because He created us to live in community, not in isolation. Furthermore, forgiveness brings spiritual clarity. When we live in resentment, it's as if we have a dark cloud hanging over us. It prevents us from seeing things clearly, fills us with negative thoughts, and this affects our connection with God. But when we forgive, that cloud dissipates. Our hearts open, and our relationship with God is strengthened, because forgiveness aligns us with His character of mercy. Now let's move on to the seventh attitude that God blesses abundantly, and this is faith. Faith is like the anchor that sustains us in the midst of storms. It's that certainty in what we can't see, but we know it's there. That God is there, working behind the scenes, even when circumstances tell us otherwise. And the wonderful thing is that faith not only connects us to God, but it's also an attitude that opens the doors to great blessings. Hebrews 11 verse 1 defines faith in such a powerful way. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. This certainty, this belief in what has not yet happened, is what God seeks in us. Why? Because faith is the way we show we trust in His plan, even when we don't understand the path. It's that attitude of saying, God, I don't see it yet, but I believe you are already working for me. Now, faith is not a passive attitude. It's not just about waiting and that's it. Faith is active. It's a daily decision to keep going, to keep trusting, to keep believing that God will keep His promises, even when things look difficult. And it's precisely in those moments of trial that faith is most needed. We can all have faith when things are going well, but true faith, the kind God blesses, is the kind that remains steadfast when everything seems against us. God blesses faith in incredible ways, and one of the clearest examples of this is seen in the life of Abraham. God promised him that he would be the father of a great nation, but years, many years, passed before that promise was fulfilled. During that time, Abraham had to walk by faith, trusting that God would keep His word. And in the end, when Isaac was born, he not only saw the blessing of his faith, but he became the father of many generations. It's a reminder that God never forgets His promises, but often, it requires us to maintain faith in the process. One of the great blessings of faith is that it gives us hope. Faith allows us to see beyond current circumstances. When you have faith, you don't focus only on the problems of the present, but on what God has already promised. And that hope gives you the strength to continue, to get up each day with an attitude of trust, knowing that God is with you and that His plan is perfect. Faith also gives us peace. There's something very special about being able to say, I don't know how, I don't know when, but I trust that God has everything under control. That trust frees you from anxiety and fear and allows you to rest in His promise. Because, at the end of the day, faith isn't about having all the answers, but about trusting in the one who does. In Philippians 4 verses 6-7, we are told not to worry about anything, but through prayer and faith, we will experience the peace of God that surpasses all understanding. What a beautiful promise! Another incredible blessing of faith is that it activates the power of God in our lives. Jesus, on many occasions, healed people who had faith, telling them, "Your faith has healed you." It wasn't just His power, but the people's faith that opened the door to that healing. It's a reminder that faith is not just a mental attitude, but a force that moves mountains. Jesus himself said in Matthew 17 verse 20 that if we had faith the size of a mustard seed, we could move mountains. This shows us the incredible power of faith when put into action. Faith also gives us resilience. In life, we will face difficult times, trials, and challenges that seem too great for us. But faith gives us the inner strength to keep going, to not give up. It's like the fuel that drives us forward when our strength runs out. And the most beautiful thing is that the more we walk by faith, the stronger our relationship with God becomes. Faith connects us to His strength. And when we trust in Him, we realize we can overcome any obstacle. Something important to remember is that faith is not an emotion we feel at certain moments, but a decision. It's easy to feel faith when everything is going well, but true faith is the kind that chooses to believe when everything else seems to fall apart. In those moments of uncertainty, when we see no way out, it is when faith in God sustains us. Because, as 2 Corinthians 5 verse 7 says, we walk by faith, not by sight. It's not about what our eyes see, but what our hearts believe. God blesses faith in ways we sometimes don't even imagine. Often, when we maintain faith in the midst of difficulties, God surprises us with blessings that go beyond what we had asked or hoped for. It's as if, by maintaining our trust in Him, God opens the windows of heaven and pours out His favor upon us in ways we could never have foreseen. And with this, we conclude this journey through the 7 attitudes that God abundantly blesses: humility, generosity, patience, gratitude, obedience, forgiveness, and faith. Each of these attitudes not only brings us closer to God, but also profoundly transforms our way of life. It helps us walk with purpose, with hope, and with a more real and sincere connection with our Creator. Remember that these attitudes are not achievements you should immediately attain, but practices you can develop day by day with God's help. He knows your heart, your struggles, your desires, and your intentions. And when He sees in you a genuine desire to grow, to draw closer to Him, to live according to His will, He responds with grace, love, and blessing. So don't be discouraged if you feel you still have much to learn or change. We are all in a process. The important thing is to walk toward God, step by step, attitude by attitude, trusting that He is working in your life even when you don't see Him. Because when you align yourself with what God values, when you cultivate the attitudes that touch His heart, blessings will not be long in coming. God is a loving, generous, and patient Father, and His greatest desire is to see you grow, flourish, and live fully under His care. So, consider these attitudes as spiritual tools, as seeds you can sow in your heart every day. And you will see how, over time, God will make them bear fruit, abundant fruit. Thank you for having come this far. May each word be like a seed of life and transformation. And from today on, may these 7 attitudes accompany you, guide you, and bring you closer to that God who loves you with eternal love, who cares for you with infinite tenderness, and who blesses you abundantly. Each of these 7 attitudes, humility, generosity, patience, gratitude, obedience, forgiveness, and faith, not only represent virtues that please God, but real paths to a full, balanced, and deeply blessed life. They are not simple moral recommendations or unattainable goals. They are decisions of the heart, daily exercises of the soul that allow us to align our lives with the Father's will. God is not looking for perfection, but for willingness. He doesn't look at how flawless you are, but at how much you are willing to allow yourself to be transformed. These attitudes are not to be displayed before others, but to be lived before Him who sees the secrets and rewards with eternal love. If today you choose to live with humility, give with generosity, wait with patience, give thanks in all things, obey with faith, forgive with compassion, and trust in the unseen, you will be walking a path where blessings are not a coincidence, but a consequence. God is pleased with a heart that surrenders with sincerity and walks with conviction. And remember, you are not alone in this process. The same God who calls you to cultivate these attitudes is the one who strengthens you to live them. He is your guide, your sustenance, and your greatest reward. May each day be an opportunity to reflect His light, extend His grace, and experience His supernatural favor. Because when your heart aligns with heaven, blessings on earth begin to flourish.